force or put on the pressure to force the NFL to force these athletes to stand. But, it's all, again, it's all fluff. It's all mind games. It's all distractions. It's all distortions. And the actual working title of this show, by the way, is At Least We Didn't Get Hillary, the Non-Binary Election of 2016. And that's what I want to get into, and that's what I want to discuss, because, that's what we heard over and over again, is we can't have Hillary. We got to stop Hillary from getting the White House. It's a binary election. You've only got two choices. You got to go with the lesser of two evils. Well, what have we noticed that Donald Trump has been doing? Just in the last week or so, week or two, that even many of his, or at least some within his base, have gotten quite upset about. He's negotiated with the Democrats on the debt ceiling. He's negotiated with the Democrats on DACA with the Dreamers. This has caused some of his supporters, and he still has most of his supporters, make no mistake about it. But this has caused some of his supporters, especially on the DACA Dreamer stuff, and especially Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter, who was a big-time Trump pumper during the primary, willing to lie about other candidates, and willing to attack conservatives who would not support Donald Trump, who now says, or said recently, who doesn't want to see Trump impeached? But some of his supporters have gone public, made videos of themselves burning the Make America Great Again hats. But again, he's working with the left. He's working with the liberals. He's attacking conservatives. He's attacking rhinos as well. But he's not working with his party. And look, you can say anything you want about the Do-Nothing Congress. And a lot of times they are a Do-Nothing Congress. A lot of times they are an inept and incompetent Congress. But nevertheless, a lot of us, I think, would hopefully agree that a true leader, a true statesman, a true de facto head of the party would be trying his darndest, would be proactive in working with his party to work through disagreements, to come to a place of mutual understanding. And seemingly that's not happening. He's just running to the Democrats. Now, this from the Right Scoop, I posted this on my timeline and on the American Faith Today timeline. Now he's saying he'll negotiate with the Democrats on a new health care bill. Again, rightscoop.com. The blogger here, whose screen name is Right Scoop, and he writes, I know Republicans have failed to do what they promised in repealing Obamacare, and have also failed at passing Obamacare Light. They've completely failed all the way around. But if Trump intends on negotiating with Nancy and Chuck, then this is a terrible idea that will only make things worse. They are the ones who shoved Obamacare down our throats in the first place. If, however, he goes on to talk about working with Democrats in Republican states, bring them over to the Republican side of health care, but he says, but a bill that's passed by even a few Democrats is likely to be worse than what we've already seen. If they aren't fixing the inherent problems driving up the cost, then what's the point? What I'd rather have heard Trump say is that he's ready to go toe-to-toe with some of these rhinos who are up for re-election in the House and Senate to fight to get Republicans elected who absolutely will repeal Obamacare. After all, they said he was a fighter, right? He goes on to say Trump really isn't a fighter. He'll take whatever bill comes out of the House and Senate and call it repeal and then claim victory. This guy, when it was all said and done, by the way, full disclosure, voted for Trump. He says that's why he's arguing now he'll negotiate with Democrats. See, he's already calling it even better before he's even started the process. He goes on to try to give Trump some credit, saying Trump has said he's going to sign an executive order. Of course, we ragged on Obama for his executive orders, but they're magically okay with Trump. But he's going to sign an executive order that will allow people to cross state lines to buy health care policies. that's actually a good thing, and we'll certainly applaud him for it when it happens. Well, here's the thing, though, and I mentioned this on, again, the American Faith Today Facebook page. And I could be wrong here, but I don't think I am, and there's been people who've agreed with me. When you have the federal government still in control of basically all of this, mandating this, mandating that, determining what policies are compliant and which are not, and when you hear stories that the number of insurers actually offering plans through the exchanges are declining in every state, then at this point, under those set of circumstances, what good is this going to do? How meaningful is this going to be in and of itself? I don't think it's going to do a darn thing, for the most part. I think it's just a symbolic good try and nothing else. But again, he's going towards the left. He's going with the Democrats. Again, he's working with the opposing party that for years and years and years, the Rush Limbaughs of the world, who said that you can't work with the Democrats because they're not going to negotiate. They're going to try to get everything that they want. They're going to try to screw the Republicans, the conservatives. And I'm sure with this, again, I don't even really listen to him much anymore, so somebody else would maybe have to clue me in. But I'm sure he's somehow saying this is all perfectly fine. Some deep 87th dimensional chess game that Donald Trump is playing, and it's all going to work out in the end. Pardon me, but I don't think that it will. Now, one of the other things that came up, that of course that he recently did, is he went to the UN, Trump did. He gave a speech that conservatives, Republicans, even some outside, although actually most of them on the left side of the aisle thought it was horrific, but a lot of the so-called conservative commentators, the rank-and-file Republicans, thought it was a great speech at the United Nations. I wanted to give a little bit of input, share excerpts from a couple stories here, 2 or 3 stories. David French, National Review, who wrote an article called A Donald Trump Speech, a Barack Obama Foreign Policy. And that's kind of my point, is that on the things that matter, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to the debt, when it comes to some of these other issues, I don't think we would be able to distinguish or we would see a whole lot of deviation between not only a Donald Trump administration, or not only between Donald Trump and Barack Obama, but between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. But French writes, basically, that there was a lot to like in Trump's remarks to the UN. He went there, finally gave those globalist technocrats a piece of the American mind, calling out our enemies, delivering the kind of blunt talk, a lesson on patriotism, a rejection of world government, and the best line about socialism ever spoken to a full gathering of the world's foremost intergovernmental organization. But French then goes on to say, I flipped off the television and went back to real life, where the actual president of the United States is pursuing a foreign policy very, very much like the globalist presidents who came before him. In just under 9 months on the job, Donald Trump has recertified the Iran deal, wrapped both his arms around Saudi Arabia, and pursued only a slightly more muscular version of the military offensive begun by Barack Obama in Iraq and Syria. And by the way, one of the things that I absolutely do not want to neglect to mention, this is probably in the first take, if you will, when I brought out Mark Levin as well in the wiretapping. Got to give credit to Brandon Ward at World Events in the Bible, because that is one of my favorite websites, and he had a story that kind of quietly, under the radar, Donald Trump signed off on 3 or 4 pieces of legislation that allow the federal government, that allow the intelligence agencies to do more warrantless wiretapping on the American people. So while Mark Levin, and while the Rush Limbaughs of the world, and while many of these other people who have been tied up in this whole, the Democrats and Obama wiretap Donald Trump, while they're off in that little area of reality. And while they're off on that trip, on that kick, Donald Trump is perfectly happy to allow greater spying on the American people, on you and me, while we're supposed to be horrified at what was allegedly done to him for political reasons. Another thing that he did that was kind of under the radar, he signed off, or he's on the verge of signing off on removing some of these restrictions that are still on place on the use of military drones, to where now there will be more droning of people, more droning of, at times, people who aren't even major terrorists, that we're just going to drone people to our little heart's content, so to speak. So he's doing that, or he will do that as well. But anyway, pursued only a slightly more muscular version of the military offensive begun by Barack Obama in Iraq and Syria. Oh, and by the way, he now apparently is bombing Libya for the first time as well. And of course, he dropped some bombs on, or we dropped some bombs on North Korea. He's provided enough troops to slightly improve conditions on the ground in Afghanistan if all goes well, but not nearly enough to turn the tide so that our longest war is sure to continue apace. He's reaffirmed his commitments to NATO, and he's failed to initiate any real change in American relations with Russia and China. In other words, more of the same old status quo. Now, French says he has a change in tone, but after he said North Korea would be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before if it didn't shape up, Kim Jong-un and North Korea responded by testing a hydrogen bomb and launching not one but two missiles straight over the islands of Japan. French says Rocket Man is not intimidated, leaving President Trump stuck in the same rut as every other president since Eisenhower. He says the Trump that gave the UN speech sounded a bit like the grown-up version of Trump on the campaign trail. The Trump in the Oval Office is the president of the status quo. He's a man of the establishment. Now, French actually says some of this is good, reaffirming America's commitment to NATO, maintaining sanctions against Russia, conducting military operations in accordance with the laws of war, which he wasn't sure that he would, refusing to risk retreat in Afghanistan. But other than the symbolic withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords, he hasn't withdrawn from the Iran deal. French said he should reconsider the embrace of Saudi Arabia, and he must carefully consider whether American foreign policy needs a course correction when it comes to Korea, the Korean Peninsula. He says Trump's promises aren't worth the pixels they're printed on. Even his most stirring declaration might be undermined by his very next tweet. Might be, I'd say almost certainly will be, but anyway, basically being actions speak louder than words. And while everybody was praising his words, ultimately, if the walk doesn't match the talk, then what good is the talk? And so far, Trump, by and large, I think many of us, if we're honest, would agree, has been pretty much all talk. Now, here's another take, a couple of them actually, on that same speech, though. From 21stCenturyWire.com, Trump bears himself in a kind of neocon full Monty with his United Nations speech. Robert Perry, Consortium News, says Trump offered a crude patchwork of propaganda and bluster, partly delivered as a campaign speech, praising his own leadership, boasting about the relatively strong U.S. economy that he mostly inherited, and partly reflecting his continued subservience to Benjamin Netanyahu. Perhaps most importantly, Trump's speech may have extinguished any flickering hope that his presidency might achieve some valuable course corrections in how the United States deals with the world, i.e., shifting away from disastrous war interventionist policies of his two predecessors. Before the speech, there was at least some thinking that his visceral disdain for the neocons, who mostly opposed his nomination and election, might lead him to a realization that their policies toward Iran, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere were at the core of America's repeated and costly failures in recent decades. Instead, apparently after a bracing lecture from Netanyahu, Trump bared himself in a kind of neocon full Monty. He repeated the Israeli neocon tripe about Iran destabilizing the Middle East when Shiite-ruled Iran actually has helped stabilize